On his European tour, the Prime Minister offers a preview of major spending to come with an eye to opening up new markets.
Our government is in the process of unleashing $500 billion of investment in energy infrastructure, port infrastructure.
The closest Mark Carney has come yet to admitting which nation-building projects his government wants to prioritize. Expansions of the Port of Montreal, its operators say, would bring in $140 million per year, and of northern Manitoba's Port of Churchill to get liquefied natural gas to overseas markets.
We have this amazing opportunity to build up an existing port. An existing asset, something that's already shipping critical minerals to international markets this year, but really to take it to the next level. And I got to tell you, my phone blew up first thing this morning.
There is a lot happening. It's the number one focus of this government is to build that infrastructure.
A single announcement can change everything. One tariff, one headline, one market that suddenly closes, but the damage might not end on the farms. It could be growing inside the halls of power. What's really happening behind the scenes in Ottawa? And Berlin? And who is cashing in while Canada talks? Here's the short version. The Prime Minister flew to Europe with a pitch. Canada will be a long-term supplier of energy, critical minerals and infrastructure. Big promises, big potential, big photo ops. The public pages call it partnership and diversification. The message is clear. Canada wants new markets, new friends, new contracts. But there's a flip side. While diplomats hand out speeches in conference halls, something else is happening in real time. Commerce is not patient. Deals get made by whoever has capacity today. Terminals, tankers, signed contracts. Investors and buyers pay for certainty, not for blueprints. So we'll walk this through like a political thriller. First, what was promised on the tour, the ports, the minerals, the export vision. Second, what the U.S. moved to lock down at home. Practical infrastructure, tankers leaving ports, headline-making trade moves. Third, the human fallout back in Canada, mills, farms, factories that feel the cost. And finally, the big question. Did the trip strengthen Canada's hand or make the country look riskier to the people who decide where money goes? Here's one promise you should hold on to while you listen. Speeches create hope. Contracts create cash flow. Investors choose the latter. In this episode, I'll point to the specific promises, the immediate market responses, and the moment that separates optimistic talk from immediate results. I'll also show one concrete example later, a micro story. That ties the diplomatic theatrics to a real person's paycheck. Stay with me. There's a reveal coming that sharpens the contrast between words and delivery, and it's not what most headlines focused on. So let's start at the beginning, the European tour itself. At first glance, it looked like the classic playbook. Handshakes, podium speeches, carefully crafted statements about partnership and shared goals. But behind the polished words was a very specific sales pitch, Canada as a future energy powerhouse. The Prime Minister stood in Berlin and painted a picture. Expansions of Montreal's port to handle more exports. The revival of Churchill in northern Manitoba as a northern shipping hub. Billions for infrastructure that would move liquefied natural gas across the Atlantic. A critical minerals partnership with Germany to reduce dependence on China and Russia. On paper, it sounded like Canada was finally stepping up with a bold vision. But here's the catch. Most of these promises weren't tied to firm contracts, timelines, or even approvals back in Ottawa. They were sketches. We could build this, we may expand that, we will look at options. If you're Germany, you nod politely because, yes, you want new partners, but you also want certainty. And certainty wasn't on the table. That's the difference between vision and leverage. A speech can float the idea of LNG tankers leaving the East Coast, but if no terminal exists, if no tanker has been booked, if no contract has been signed, then the offer is just air. And in international trade, air doesn't fill ships. Meanwhile, the timing couldn't have been sharper. As Carney pitched promises, the U.S. was already moving cargo. Gulf Coast terminals were shipping liquefied natural gas today. Pipelines were already feeding ports. And American negotiators weren't talking about someday. They were locking in real contracts with European buyers. That sets up the real tension in this story. Canada was talking, America was delivering. And in the global marketplace, delivery always wins. But here's where the cracks really start to show. While speeches echoed in Berlin, Washington rolled out a fresh set of tariffs, hitting Canadian lumber, canola, and steel, promises overseas, pressure at home. And this is where we start to see the first consequences. In Part 3, we'll look at how those tariffs landed and the real impact on Canadian industries. not just in headlines, but in jobs and paychecks. Here's where the story shifts from speeches to survival. While Berlin heard Canada's promises, Canadian industries felt Washington's pressure. Tariffs aren't abstract. They're bills, they're layoffs, they're canceled shifts. And in this case, they landed fast. Take lumber. Mills in British Columbia were already under strain from global competition and rising costs. Add a tariff wall, and suddenly it's not about expansion. It's about survival. Several mills cut back shifts, some even warning of permanent closures. That's not theory. That's families facing lost paychecks. Then look at agriculture. Prairie farmers who depend on canola exports watched markets tighten overnight. When your product is priced higher because of tariffs, buyers look elsewhere. The field still produces, but the revenue disappears. That's pressure you feel, not at a conference in Berlin, but on the farm where bills still need to be paid. And Ontario's auto sector? It runs on cross-border supply chains. Parts move back and forth daily. When tariffs make every component more expensive, manufacturers start asking a simple question. Why keep the plant in Ontario when Michigan or Ohio are tariff-free? For workers, that's the kind of question that keeps you up at night. Now, contrast this with the US. While Canadian workers were absorbing shocks, American LNG was moving through Gulf Coast terminals. American steel had government protection, and American producers were signing energy contracts with Europe. Washington's message was clear: we deliver today. Ottawa's message sounded like, we'll get there eventually. This is where the political storm started to build. Premiers from Alberta and Saskatchewan said their exports were being ignored. Ontario's leadership warned of auto jobs, bleeding south. Even unions, usually loyal allies of Ottawa, began speaking out, warning that workers can't live on promises. It's not just economics, it's credibility. When your closest ally hits you with tariffs while you're pitching future partnerships overseas, it makes Canada look weak at home and unreliable abroad. And once that perception takes hold, investors notice. But the real turning point isn't just in boardrooms or legislatures, it's in the lives of ordinary Canadians watching jobs move, factories close, and markets slip away. This is where the story gets bigger than ports, pipelines, or even tariffs. It's about Canada's image, the reputation that once made the country a safe bet for investors and trade partners. For decades, Canada was seen as steady, predictable, and reliable. Not the biggest player in the room, but the trustworthy one. And that image mattered. It gave Canadian companies leverage, brought in foreign capital, and let industries punch above their weight. But credibility is fragile. On the European stage, the pitch sounded ambitious. LNG terminals, critical minerals, infrastructure on the horizon. Yet, without firm contracts, timelines, or approvals, the offer looked more like a wish list than a guarantee. Buyers don't invest in maybe, they want certainty. Shipping schedules, signed deals, guaranteed delivery. What Canada offered was potential. Meanwhile, America showcased the opposite. Signed contracts, tankers already loaded, energy flowing across the Atlantic. Washington was not just making promises, it was cashing in. The message to investors was clear. The U.S. delivers today, and money follows certainty. This contrast turned speeches into a liability. If Europe walks away with polite handshakes and no contracts, and if the U.S. walks away with markets, Canada's brand shifts from dependable partner to unproven risk. That perception doesn't just sting politically, it costs billions in lost investment. At home, the optics were even worse. Tariffs piling up, workers facing uncertainty, business groups calling Ottawa out, even premiers and unions, usually divided on almost everything, were united in their frustration. The storyline wrote itself. Canada's leaders were chasing headlines abroad while missing results at home. And here's the hard truth. Once the perception of weakness sets in, it's like a stain. Investors and buyers don't quickly forget. Credibility takes years to build, but only a moment to lose. And right now, Canada's reputation was sliding at the exact same time America's was hardening. So the stakes aren't just today's tariffs. They're the long-term question. Does Canada still look like a country that can deliver? In part 5, we'll bring it all together. The split screen of promises versus paychecks, the political cost, and the looming question for Canada's future. So here we are. A European tour filled with promises, a domestic economy under pressure from U.S. tariffs, and a reputation caught between ambition and reality. The split screen is clear. Speeches in Berlin, paychecks shrinking at home. For workers in forestry, farming, and auto plants, the message from Ottawa felt distant. They weren't asking for visions of future ports or LNG hubs. They were asking for contracts today, for markets they could actually sell into, for jobs they could count on. That gap between political theater and economic reality is where frustration turns into mistrust. And once mistrust takes root, it spreads fast. Globally, the timing couldn't be worse. The U.S. has doubled down on trade dominance, shipping energy, protecting its industries, and signing deals that reshape entire markets. Europe desperate for security, is choosing reliability over rhetoric. And China, always a wild card, is watching for openings wherever Western partners stumble. Canada risks being squeezed in the middle. Too slow to compete with the US, too uncertain to anchor Europe, and too cautious to fully break away from Chinese supply chains. That's not just a tactical problem. It's a strategic one. If Canada can't show that it delivers, it risks being sidelined in the very markets it claims to want to lead. And here's the toughest part. The solution isn't a speech or tour, it's decisions. Messy, expensive, politically risky decisions. Approving infrastructure, backing industries with real support, laying down contracts before rivals scoop them up. Without that, Canada's big vision will remain exactly that, a vision, not a reality. So the question is simple but urgent. Will Canada make the leap from talking about potential to actually delivering results? Or will this moment go down as the time when opportunity slipped away? Not because the world didn't need Canada, but because Canada hesitated? What's your take? Is Canada missing its chance or just biding its time for a bigger play? Drop your thoughts below. Because this isn't just a story about trade, it's about Canada's place in a world where credibility is the ultimate currency.